It's like something a Hollywood screenwriter might have conjured. U.S. scientists examining and reverse engineering a crashed alien spacecraft, studying the bodies of the extraterrestrials at a secret U.S. Air Force facility. In 1989, a man named Bob Lazar went public with claims that this is exactly what was happening at Area 51, a name for that secret facility in the desert, and said he worked on the alien spacecraft. Today, Bob Lazar lives in mid-Michigan, where he runs a scientific supply company. And he's the focus of a new documentary from investigative filmmaker Jeremy Kenyon Lockyer Corbell and narrated by actor Mickey Rourke. The film, Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers.
This story is extraordinary, especially if it's true. And it all started in the desert, just north of Las Vegas.
A local scientist who's worked at Groom Lake
said to be where top-secret weapons systems have been tested over the years.
He has asked that his identity be shielded.
Exactly what's going on up there?
What's going on up there could be the most important event in history. Physical contact and proof from another system, another planet, another intelligence.
Jeremy is with us now via Skype. Pleasure to welcome you to Stateside, Jeremy.
Thanks so much, Cynthia, for having me on.
In this world of UFOs and extraterrestrials, how important is this guy who runs a scientific supply company in Langsburg, Michigan?
Right. Bob Lazar is kind of the Elvis of ufology. He's the guy that everybody has tried to talk with for about 30 years, and it's been very difficult. He hasn't been, very forward and out in the public's eye. An investigative reporter, George Knapp, who's my mentor in journalism, he broke the story in 1989, but it was very difficult all these years to really get to know who is Bob Lazar, the guy that made these explosive claims.
And as we see in your film, you make heavy use of that on-camera interview that Bob did back in 1989. Tell us, why did he decide to talk then, more than 30 years after the work he said he was doing at Area 51?
Yeah, so originally in 1989, whether you believe it or not, it is true. Bob Lazar came forward to protect himself. He was under threat. At that point, he was getting personal threats because of the work that he was doing and his personal life and what occurred right after that. He showed people the test flights on 3 occasions from a distance over Papoose Lake, which is a sub-area of Area 51. People didn't even really know about back then. So he came forward really to protect himself. He was convinced by George Knapp that it would protect him to get in front of it. If he just said it all at one time, then there's nothing else that could be held against him.
So he sets it all out to George Knapp and then goes silent. Why did he agree to talk to you some 30 years later?
My charming personality, obviously. But no, he was I think I convinced him. I think after 30 years of people disemboweling his story and perverting it and changing it, inserting their fiction and their fantasy, I think enough is enough. I think I was able to convince him that the history books would be written with false information if he didn't come forward again and show people really who he is in his daily life and be clear on what exactly it is that he's claiming.
So without blowing the reason you want people to watch your film, Jeremy, give us a sense of sort out the truth from all the hyperbole and all the fiction that is built up around this man. What is it? What do you believe he did for the government?
Right. Well, we're pretty much know for sure that Bob Lazar is a scientist, a physicist, and that he was employed in 1989 to work at a secret base just south of Groom Lake on the Area 51 complex, a site called S4. And there he was tasked with reverse engineering or back engineering alien propulsion. So a propulsion system based on gravity wave amplification and a very special super heavy element called element 115 in a stabilized form. This was his claim and remains his claim that was his job, that it was an impossible task, but that was his job, was to work on the power and the propulsion of a flying saucer that we have 9 of at this base just south of Groom Lake in Area 51. It's wild.
It is. It is. So as you sat there and you looked at him and you talked with him and dug into this with him, how convinced are you that what Bob is saying is true? I mean, and how close did you get to proving it?
Right. So, look, this is a nuts and bolts story. This is not about belief. It's either true or it's not true. Our government is either attempting to reverse engineer alien spacecraft or they're not. I think looking at Bob's story now, I mean, the problem with Bob, why his story won't go away is because it's really hard to dismiss him. You watch him. I mean, he passed 4 polygraph tests. You watch him. Not only do you want to believe him, you get the sense he's telling the truth, and it's very frustrating to your worldview. Now, are we ever going to prove it definitively? I mean, unless somebody walks me into that base, I don't think so. Mm-hmm. But we've come very close through the breadcrumbs of his story over 30 years. Things have occurred over these 30 years that weren't possible to know before. For example, I found the individual and got on the phone with the individual who did the security clearance for Bob to work at the base. That couldn't have been done 30 years ago when George Knapp was trying because of just, time, the envelope of time gave us more opportunity. Bob also knew about this hand scanner that everybody thought was, fiction. It was made up. Well, those photos were just declassified. And I was able to show that indeed there is a scanner, a biometric scanner that was used at that time, just like he said. And everybody mocked him for it. So all these little things I've been able to kind of parse and find out over these 30 years and having Bob talk to me directly on camera for the viewer. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I think it's hard to dismiss Bob. I think to minimize a message, you dehumanize the messenger. And that's what people have tried to do for 3 decades. But now I think, we took the mic back, telling this story clear and as Bob wants it, told, which is direct.
That actually was a moment that stuck with me as I watched your film, was his reaction when you put down these declassified photos of this scanner that he said, oh my gosh. I mean, that was, he could not have, it was a very believable reaction. Let me just say that.
Well, because it was real. I mean, people always talk about this story like it was a believable reaction, and I get that. But let me tell you, you're seeing it as it's unfolding in my documentary. This is what happened. Bob's one rule for me to totally insert myself into his life. I mean, give me that box full of tapes. I'm going to get them digitized, these 30-year-old tapes. Mm-hmm. He let me into his life completely, which is against his nature. But the one restriction he had on me is, I can't make anything up. I can't sensationalize a story that is already sensational. So really, it was the easiest documentary in the world. I just had to show you what I saw. And that moment is powerful. He is so surprised to be vindicated, to see this hand scanner that he had talked about for almost 3 decades, and people thought it was laughable. Turns out he was right. How did he know?
Tell us a little about Bob Lazar's, what he tells you he thought when he first set eyes on this spacecraft that he was working with. What did it look like? What did he think?
Okay, yeah. So this is really fascinating. Bob is so analytical. He was given a whole bunch of briefings before he actually saw his first disc. And he looked through the briefings and they were saying wild things. I mean, talking about another civilization, another species of being that came from another star system. And he didn't know what to think about this. He's a rocket guy, an engine guy, a propulsion guy. But he walks up, he sees the disc for the first time, and the first thought that crosses his mind on this secret base in Nevada, the first thought is, wow, this is what everybody talked about, flying saucers. But wow, they're ours. We made them. He thought people were silly for believing in UFOs. However, when he stepped inside the craft to look at a part of the propulsion system, when he actually stepped inside the flying saucer, that's when he said it felt ominous because the seating was about half the size that you would have for a normal-sized human.
One of the questions that's kind of comes to mind in your film and things written about Bob Lazar is, so here's this guy that was employed as a physicist with this task. How did he get access to all of the kind of documentation? Why was he chosen?
Right. And so this is one of the big question marks. Look, the detractors, the first thing they go after to try to dismiss Bob's story is his unprovable education. He claimed that he attended classes at Caltech and MIT, neither of which have record of him. So you have this issue here. You've got a very smart person. We cannot, for 30 years, we cannot prove his education. Yet I have proven, and has George Knapp back in 1989, definitively, Bob Lazar worked at Los Alamos as a physicist. I actually interviewed and got on record another physicist who was in security briefings with Bob Lazar. Didn't know anything about UFOs. He just remembers Bob Lazar from that time. So we know we got a really smart guy who's got incredible abilities. We can't prove his education. Some people say, well, this is part of the setup. Maybe it's a catch and release. They wanted to show somebody all this stuff and slowly try to leak some of it out. And Bob admits maybe he's the perfect patsy for all of that. But what he is firm on is that this technology exists. He saw it. He used his own hands. He dismantled it. That's very different than anything he read in the briefings about aliens or this sort of thing. He actually physically worked on a gravity wave amplification system powered by element 115. This is incredible stuff. So Bob really separates what he read from what he had his physical hands on, one flying saucer, one craft, which is extraordinary enough if you believe Bob Lazar. But that's the delineation. That's the difference with Bob Lazar. He knows what he worked on. He was told a lot of stuff, read a lot of briefings that had to do with other programs associated with this power and propulsion program, such as biology, that kind of thing. But he can't prove that part.
One of the things that struck me as I watched your film is the normal everyday life of Bob Lazar at home, going to work at his company. Do you think his neighbors in mid-Michigan would have any sense that this guy is kind of, like you say, he's kind of so central to the ufology culture?
Yeah, I guess I didn't explain that well enough. I mean, he is absolutely the reason you know the words Area 51. I mean, Bob Lazar is the icon with his Coke bottle glasses. I was in India and I found a kid that was selling chai and we're talking about UFOs and he lifted his hands by his eyes and jiggled his hands like Coke bottle glasses. He says, Bob Lazar. I mean, he's famous all around the world. The standard flying saucer we know about is, kind of iconicized into popular culture. That's because of Bob Lazar. They mention part of what he told in things like The X-Files and Independence Day. There's a Bob Lazar character. There's Area 51 beef jerky. There's shot glasses of Area 51. It's incredible how this has permeated popular culture because of Bob Lazar. And yeah, he's had some incredible impact. But yet the people in his daily life, they know what he went through. It was painful. It was difficult. It was not a good feeling. They weren't good times. It brings up terrible memories. I mean, in fact, when I showed Bob the film, the first cut, I thought he was going to hightail it. He absolutely, it brought up all these negative, memories for him. So no, the people in his life, the average people in his life, they don't even talk about UFOs with Bob. To them, he's just Bob.
Does he still feel as though he is under siege? Is he feel as though he's being watched? Did he have any trepidation about coming forward and kind of digging all this back up again?
Yeah, well, there's a very dramatic moment in my movie, which everybody can see. And again, that happened. That actually happened, what you see in my movie. So the joke was, after 30 years, who cares what he has to say? He is kind of done with it. He figured there's very little monitoring done on his life by any of the agencies. However, he was raided by multiple agencies while in New Mexico under very, very dubious circumstances. We thought that was very strange, but we thought there was nobody listening. We thought nobody cared. Well, on one of the last filmings I did at his house, the next day, his business was raided by the FBI right there in Michigan. And actually it was raided by multiple federal agencies. And, they had 25, 26 forensic collection agents looking for paperwork was the official thing that they said. It didn't quite stand up, to why they would have so many agencies there. And it got even weirder. And you'll see that in my film. So yeah, I think there is some interest, obviously, from government agencies in if Bob Lazar is telling the truth and if indeed he did get a piece of the fuel source, a stable form of element 115 out of Los Alamos, where it was machined in 1989. That would be something.
Jeremy Corbell, his latest film is Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers. Jeremy, thank you for sharing your work with us, and thanks for speaking with us.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's a real pleasure, and I just hope that everybody that hears this, their curiosity is weaponized.
This story is extraordinary, especially if it's true. And it all started in the desert, just north of Las Vegas.
A local scientist who's worked at Groom Lake
Said to be where top secret weapons systems have been tested over the years.
He has asked that his identity be shielded.
Exactly what's going on up there? What's going on up there could be the most important event in history. Physical contact and proof from another system, another planet, another intelligence.
What would happen to you if the government learned that you were giving us this information?
He just wanted to stay alive.
Maybe this has been kept from us for a good reason.
Sir, how do we know you are who you say you are?
My name's Bob Lazar.
I'm known for working at a classified base and reverse engineered alien spacecraft.
It went all over the world. You put Area 51 on the map.
Can we ever be made whole if we're not believed?
We can't verify what was going on in his background.
I have no motivation to lie. The science and the technology can change us.
We've always looked to the skies for answers instead of looking into ourselves.